It says we ought to pay attention only to intrinsic properties of work of art. Its other extrinsic properties are irrelevant to our aesthetic interactions with it. For example, when we look at a painting, we should consider only what is directly presented in our experience of it. What is really aesthetically relevant, therefore, is not what a painting symbolizes, but what it directly presents to experience.
Okay. So what is our conclusion here?
It's uh, what is really relevant, what is really aesthetically relevant, is not what a painting symbolizes, but what is directly presents to experience.
Actually not.
Oh no, it's like we ought to pay
Yes.
attention. Oh,
So
shit.
they're saying like, hey, we ought to pay attention only to the intrinsic properties of art. And
It's
why?
like a thing. Yeah, I see.
So they tell, and the reason why they give us so far is extrinsic properties are irrelevant to our aesthetic interactions with it. Okay, cool. Just because extrinsic properties are irrelevant to our aesthetic, that doesn't mean that we should only pay attention. Like, I don't know why aesthetic has anything to do with anything so far. And then it
Mm,
goes on to say, for example, when we look at a painting, we should consider only what is directly presented in our experience of it.
yeah.
What is really aesthetically relevant is not what our painting symbolizes, but what it directly presents to experience. So why should we only pay attention to intrinsic properties then? We don't really, what could we predict here that would guarantee that we should only pay attention to intrinsic properties?
Literally what you said, like we should only pay attention to intrinsic properties. No, is not like a good
That's our conclusion though, but why? So we need to say why we should only pay attention.
um because
Like, why should we not pay attention to extrinsic properties?
um so extrinsic properties do not consider what is directly presented in our experience of it. Just like we should consider this, like
What
we
do we, okay, so we say extrinsic properties are irrelevant to our aesthetic interactions with it. So
yeah.
what if we said, what if our answer was, we should only pay attention to properties that, or we should not pay attention to any properties that are irrelevant to our aesthetic interaction. Or we should pay attention to properties that are only, we should only pay attention to properties that are relevant to our aesthetic interaction. Somehow we have to connect something in our stimulus with intrinsic properties, or saying why external properties we shouldn't pay attention to.
So like you gave like a few different answer choices, like it could
Yeah,
be either one of them.
yep. I
Mm,
kind of just switched it.
okay.
All right, so
It's like
yes, sorry.
so is it doesn't sufficient assumption questions, don't they only have like one flaw though?
Yes, but I just said I connected them just using different words. One of them I said um extrinsic properties, we can't have anything that has this property. And the other way I said it was we only can have something that has this property.
Mm.
So do you see how like I just said it opposite?
But like, it's still like one
Yeah,
flaw.
it's still talking about we need to the flaw is still talking about one of the characteristics, either like aesthetic interaction or symbolizing two intrinsic properties.
Mm. Okay.
All right, so go ahead and start with A.
What an artwork symbolizes involves only extrinsic properties of that work. Did we not know that already? Or doesn't that go against the thing?
What an artwork symbolizes involves only extrinsic property. Yeah, I think that actually goes against. So yeah, that's a terrible answer.
B, there are certain properties of our experiences of artwork that can be distinguished as symbolic properties. Like it's like a very weak answer choice. And like it doesn't really even talk about like extrinsic or intrinsic.
Right. Wait, hang on. Let's go back to A for a second. What an artwork symbolizes only involves only extrinsic properties. What is really relevant there is not what a painting symbolizes, but what it directly presents to experience.
We're saying like what it symbolizes is irrelevant, right?
Yes. Okay, so this is actually an okay answer. This isn't what I predicted, but it's saying that what an artwork symbolizes involves only extrinsic property, and we're saying what is aesthetically relevant is not what a painting symbolizes. So this is telling us why extrinsic properties, like we shouldn't pay attention to them.
Okay, so like you're saying it's still like logically or like yeah, like factually okay, but it's like it doesn't connect any of the answers though, right?
Well, it tells us why it tells us why we should only pay attention to intrinsic, because it's telling us why we should not pay attention to extrinsic. So why should we only pay attention to intrinsic and not extrinsic properties?
Um,
This is telling us is like what is relevant is not what it symbolizes, but what it directly presents to experience. And A tells us that what an artwork symbolizes only extrinsic properties have those things. And our stimulus tells us is that those are not important. So that A is telling us why extrinsic properties are not important. And so
okay.
if we shouldn't pay attention to extrinsic properties, then what are the only properties that we should pay attention to?
Intrinsic.
Intrinsic. Yep.
So like A is just saying that like extrinsic properties like they symbolize art or whatever.
Yeah,
Right.
and we know symbolizing is like not important.
Mm, that's weird. Okay.
This is all really hard. This is like the hardest level question.
Oh god, okay. See, only in artworks, intrinsic properties are relevant to our aesthetic interaction with it. Oh, like I picked this, I think I remember. I picked C.
I think what I see is wrong is it doesn't tell us like why aesthetic interactions are the only thing that we should pay attention to. Like it is like
Mm,
I feel like that's the most something wrong answer for sure.
because it uses like the right words, like intrinsic
Yeah.
properties, because like, yo, like that's kind of the key term or whatever. And like a conclusion. So I don't know. It's a
Yep.
why is C wrong?
What?
Like why is C wrong?
Because we don't have anywhere that says that we should pay attention to extrinsic or that we should pay attention to aesthetic interaction or not. Like if it's the only thing we should pay attention to. Like if it said that we only should pay attention to things that if our stimulus said we only should pay attention to properties that are relevant to our aesthetic interaction, then C would be right. But we don't have that in our premise.
Like okay, so you know the second sentence it says like its other extrinsic properties are irrelevant to our aesthetic interaction.
Mm-hmm. But that's not telling us that aesthetic interactions are needed for us to pay attention to it.
Uh,
Like why should we only pay attention to intrinsic properties?
mhm.
It doesn't, we don't ever say that aesthetic things have to have aesthetic interactions in order for us to pay attention to them.
I see.
If it did say that, then C would be right.
I feel like I like just kind of made that connection without.
Oh, that's what makes this question so difficult.
Mm. Okay, and then D, it is possible. It is possible in theory for an artwork to symbolize nothing. That's okay, but I don't know.
Like, cool, not relevant.
An intrinsic property of artwork is one that relates the work to itself. Work to itself.
Yeah, cool. That doesn't mean that we should only pay attention to things that work to, yeah. That was
Hmm.
a difficult question for sure.